Welcome to Women Have Always Worked. I'm Alice Kessler-Harris, R. Gordon Hoxie Professor of American History at Columbia University. I teach and write about the history of women. If you've accessed this course out of curiosity, you'll be asking yourself when and how women's history became a field. What is women's history anyway? And does it say anything that you want to know? If you're a person of a certain age, it's unlikely that you ever had a course in the history of women. Certainly not in high school and probably not in college either. And even if you take pride in knowing something about women's studies, you might be asking why we study women's history, why it matters. What is women's history anyway? Let's start there. Why do we have a history of women? Why do we need one? What's the point? One of the common truisms about history in general is that it is written by the victors, that is, from the perspective not of the oppressed or the needy, but of those who won the battles. We don't need a historical record to tell us that for most of recorded time, men have provided political and military leadership, and then they have written the history that applauds their victories and justifies their acquisition of power. History has long been a vehicle of the powerful, written to support the purposes of individuals, political parties, states, a device to promote national loyalty. In the late 19th century, when the formal study of history started and the field became a discipline, an academic discipline, it was the exclusive province of men. Seminars, as historian Bonnie Smith tells us, were male arenas where discussions led by and in the interests of males prevailed. Historians reached for objectivity and truth by reading the written sources that had been preserved and handed down. But think about it. What was preserved? What was handed down? The records tended to be of institutions governed by men: Parliament, royal decrees, the church. These were the kinds of institutions that left records which were collected by libraries and archives. These were the records thought important enough to study and to save. No wonder the women have been missing. They've been there to be sure, but generally in secondary roles, their records non-existent or unexamined. We have found them when they have appeared as wives of great men. We have found women when they became instruments of family consolidation meant to preserve wealth or power. And yes, occasionally we find women as rulers and leaders in their own right. We know something of these women because their records were left in the archives. Boadicea, who fought the Romans in England, Joan of Arc, who took on the church, Elizabeth I, whose armada defeated the Spanish, Weetamoo, the Wampanoag chieftain who fought the British in King Philip's War. Notice that all the women I've mentioned as heroines fit profiles established by men. Their military accomplishments matter. Many other women have only recently been uncovered. Lysistrata, Hildegard of Bingen, Christine de Pizan, women whose accomplishments are social and intellectual. When we think about the women in our textbooks, they tend to be helpmeets, sometimes influential partners, but partners of great men nonetheless. So Martha Washington and Abigail Adams come down to us as the partners of our first presidents. And even the Shoshone Indian Sacagawea is remembered as the young woman who guided Lewis and Clark on their famous expedition. Only recently has a great woman like Eleanor Roosevelt emerged as an important political voice. Historically, we have known her only as the eyes and ears of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Subsumed in the myths of history, women appeared in private rather than public roles, fulfilling what were thought to be their natural tasks of childbearing and rearing, independent of politics and economy, subservient to church, religion, husbands, and the patriarchal order. In the old days, we noted the importance of women in maintaining families, and we conveniently forgot their literary, scientific, and even political accomplishments. And then came the women's liberation movement of the 1960s and 70s, a rapidly expanding effort on the part of diverse groups of women to challenge the power and influence of men and to achieve a modicum of equality in their own lives. Beginning around 1965, women tried to understand why they had been perceived to have played only secondary roles in the political upheavals of our history. In the civil rights and anti-war movements, they complained they were only secondary figures. Why had they not been able to struggle for equality alongside African Americans? Females who were African American complained that they too had been overlooked, ignored, passed over. These questions of why women haven't been able to assert themselves, even in a decade when assertion and protest was the manner of the day, became a challenge to academics of all kinds, but especially to historians. Why were women disadvantaged?